Welcome to the Hollywood Makers podcast, where we bring you industry news and we also go behind the scenes with storytellers, tech pioneers, and creatives who are really shaping the media and entertainment industry. Today's guest is Sandra de Castro Buffington, and she is someone who's not only changed how stories are told, but especially why they are told. She's been influencing scripts on Grey's Anatomy, Law & Order, and other great productions around the world. She's been a true leader in social impact entertainment. Today, we're going to talk about the power of story and the depth of grief. In the past year, Sandra lost her son, and that's a tragedy. And just months after, her home was destroyed in the LA wildfires. And yet she's here with us. She's going to share what it means to keep creating, to do good, no matter what. Hi, Sandra. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Yeah.
Sandra, we already introduced some of your career, but I really would like for you to tell the audience the marvelous thing. And I just have to say, when I went to California after 20 years in Miami, and it's about 20 years or 17, I met you in some of I think 15 years ago, and I was impressed by what you were doing. And it was in UCLA, I believe. Then you did USC, one of those. And please tell us about your career.
Thank you, Rossi. It's so good to be with you today. I'm just delighted. And where do I start? When I started working with the entertainment industry here in Los Angeles, working with Hollywood, I had been invited to take on a role that as a kind of provocateur of the industry or a story whisperer with writers and producers around topics of social good or social impact. But before I said yes to taking on this role, I said I had one condition. And they said, "What's that?" And I said, "That you let me take the work global." And they said, "What?" And in that instant, I knew they thought Hollywood was the center of the universe and that there wasn't any place else. And probably like you, Rossi, I grew up between two countries. My mother was Brazilian, my father American. I went back and forth between the US and Brazil my whole childhood. I grew up bilingual, actually multilingual. And so I knew there's a big world out there that is rich and full of stories and culture. And this Hollywood was not the only place in the universe. So they said, well, okay. And I knew they didn't know what I was talking about. So that was my intention coming into this work with the industry, was to work with other creative capitals all over the world. And I thought that would take, that I'd need to learn the job because I didn't know how to do it yet. I thought it would take at least a year. No, 6 weeks after moving to Los Angeles, I had an invitation to work in the Middle East. And so went to a bunch of countries, Oman, Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan. It was the one region of the world I hadn't worked in before. So it was a real honor, and I had a lot to learn. So that's how the work began. And, my role was to really inspire creative people. And I did this in partnership with the Writers Guild of America West, and sometimes America East in New York, but primarily in Los Angeles. So I put on a whole series of events for the industry, and I brought in the edgiest, most interesting people on topics that people never heard of before, just to have a conversation. And I would do that in the form of a kind of a panel at the Writers Guild. And at the end of each of those evenings, which was, by the way, always a combination of, people who had had direct experience of what we were talking about, and creative people who made stories about those things. So it was always that combination. I would always say at the end of the evening, for those of you who would like to take a deeper dive, I'm going to be offering a story tour. And so sign up now because we only have 20 spots. And so I thought instead of just talking about things, why don't we actually immerse people in cultures and places they would never experience on their own? And so I started partnering with community-based organizations. My first story tour was in South Africa, and we went from South Africa to India and then back to LA. Yeah. And the idea was we went into city dumps where hundreds of thousands of people lived. We met change agents, people who, kids who had grown up in city dumps, went off to college, and then came back and became community organizers and built schools and incredible programs, So this was how I started the story tours. They were overseas because I grew up going back and forth between different countries. And then I worked all over the world. And so I thought, you don't just talk to people, you give people direct experience. Well, it worked so well in shaping the kinds of stories they were telling in television and movies that in 1 3-year period, we had 365 storylines on 91 TV shows across 35 networks. And these were all stories that had social impact. They were around health, well-being, climate change, sustainability, gender equality, you name it. Prison reform, immigration, was all these topics. So then I thought, if it works to take people overseas, why can't it work to take people on story tours in their own city, right here in Los Angeles? And so we started going around LA into communities, meeting people who live there, local storytellers on the ground. And again, this had huge impact on the stories that were being told in TV and movies. And then I'll say one more piece and then see what else you want to ask me. But being university-based, I was at both USC and UCLA. I had the opportunity to partner with researchers so we could measure the impact of stories on audiences. We don't just think it impacts audiences, we know it impacts audiences. We can measure how much knowledge gain there was. How much did this story actually shift the attitude of the audience? And did they take any action as a result? Was there any behavior change? So this was something. Let me just give you a quick example.
Please.
I did a story tour on rape culture. So I took a group of 20 writers and producers to a rape treatment center, actually to 2 of them, where they learned about the rape kit collection process, the legal rights that women have, every step of that process, and the kind of amazing support there is for women, in the aftermath of an assault. That story was picked up by Grey's Anatomy. We had Grey's Anatomy writers with us. It's an episode called Silent After All These Years. And there are 2 iconic scenes in this episode. And one of them, I'll just describe one. Well, that's the first one is really depicting the rights of a woman who had all of her rights taken away during an assault and who is given her agency back during the rape kit collection process. And it goes like this. They are legally required to say, do I have your permission to take a piece of your hair? Do I have your permission to take a swab of saliva? Things like that. And she has the right every step of the way to say yes or no. Okay, cut to the scene of the woman survivor on a gurney. She's going to be rolled down this long hallway to an elevator. And what the women in the hospital did is they mobilized all the women who worked in the hospital, from the, sweepers to the receptionist, to the surgeons, to the internist. all of the nurses, all of the staff that were female, they lined the two walls of this long hallway and stood in silent support to this survivor who was coming down the hall for surgery. And she looks up and she sees all of these women standing there. Makes me cry.
Oh, wow.
Sorry. I always
No,
cry.
no. Oh my God, Sandra.
I've shown the clip 100 times. It always moves me to tears. Why? Because it shows us we're not alone. It shows us that we have community of support, that we find strength in that community. And the impact of that episode was a 43% increase in calls to the National Sexual Assault Hotline number. 43%. This is the power of story. This is the power.
Definitely.
If you have creatives listening to your podcast, you are powerful beyond belief. You can move people to action. And by the way, I'm not talking about finger wagging. No. I'm not talking about hitting the audience over the head with what the story is. Oh, no. That doesn't even work.
So important.
It's about story first. It has to be the most compelling story. And that's what the research shows. Storytellers don't need to know the research. You already know what you're doing. But researchers have looked at what you do, and it's the compelling stories that transport us into a new world where we arrive at suspension of disbelief that these impacts occur. We've got to get into suspension of disbelief to have the highest knowledge gains, biggest shifts in attitude, and biggest changes in our behavior. Just like all those people who found the hope and the confidence to call a hotline number to report what they've been afraid to report before.
And oh my God, that's why I have always loved the work you do, Sandra. And I just want to take the audience, because we're going to talk about, obviously, your resilience. You're a woman, oh my God, a human being that just lived some terrible things, and we are living terrible things. But before that, I truly believe in change through entertainment. I believe that if we unite creativity, and not just documentaries, that's like finger wagging, like you were saying, not telling people this is bad, these people, or crime podcasts or crime shows, is like through storytelling. And that's why I also admire all these screenwriters. We can change, we can provoke a positive impact in the world, and that's what you've been doing. But when Sandra realized, because I believe you came from Washington, D.C., and like you say, you've been traveling. So when that young person was moving, how did she discover, oh my God, this is something that I want to do, because I can prove that this is a change that can be made through media?
Well, let's see. I guess I'll go back, Rossi, and thanks for asking about the background. When I'm going to go back even before the first half of my career out of DC. But when I was young, like 19, I went on a kind of quest, because I was not seeing a narrative for me in society as I found it in those years. It just didn't fit me, and I needed to find something of meaning in this world that I hadn't seen. And I thought, because my Brazilian family also has roots in an indigenous community, I thought maybe I would find my answers among indigenous people in Brazil. So I thought I'd go for 2 months. I ended up staying in remote parts of South America for 5 years, my young adult years, and no running water, no electricity. These are among very traditional communities who took me under their wing and taught me a way of life, carrying water on the head, collecting food from the jungle or the sea or the river, the basic modes of survival. And I was so humbled to be invited in. Nobody cared where I came from. They just taught me freely and generously, and they welcomed me and gave me a sense of belonging. And at night, the kids would come. I stayed in a little mud hut in different villages, and the kids would come and teach me their songs. Now, my mother had been a singer. She was Brazilian, and she sang in 13 languages. So I grew up hearing songs that taught me about different cultures and the history of the world, and also about civil rights. My mother was a big activist. And in these remote communities, I was taught songs that I realized predicted the future of the community members, because the songs were about the dreams and the aspirations, the longing and the passion. It really showed me a path that they were following forward. So when I finally came back to the US and finished school and went to graduate school, I started working on behalf of women, girls, and families. I started in Latin America because I speak Spanish and Portuguese. But eventually, after the first 10 years, I was working all over the world in different regions where I didn't speak the language. But I had a chance to work with television in Brazil and to integrate content integration into storytelling. And, back in the day, that wasn't very common. And the organization I worked with at Johns Hopkins University in those times was also using a lot of music and incorporating content into songs. And so I learned a lot in those years through that. It was easier to work with the entertainment industry, global TV in Brazil, than it was with Hollywood. But fast forward 20 years later, these folks out here in LA discovered the work I'd been doing and said, well, no, come and do it in Los Angeles with Hollywood. So that is kind of the loop. That's how it went. And I was very fortunate to be able to work with India and Bollywood. And I even opened an office. I was able to get funding to start a program in India to work with Bollywood the way I was working with Hollywood. And also we funded an office in Nigeria to work with Nollywood, which Nollywood makes more movies per year than the US. Wow. So and I was fortunate too to be able to, on the story tours, take creatives from Hollywood to different creative capitals, like in South Africa to Sollywood. And I would always bring the creatives from, say, South Africa and from the US together. And we'd host a big public event, have a conversation that showcased the work of the different creatives from the different countries, and to talk about the social impact of storytelling. Yeah.
Oh my God. And so what's your belief precisely in, you gave us the example of Grey's Anatomy and that. And I remember you also work with this show, which is amazing. It's been like Grey's Anatomy for a long time. SVU, Law and Order. So I know you did some work, again, with many screenwriters working on that. So you've seen that impact. And that's what I believe. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I'll give you an example from Law and Order Special Victims Unit. At one point, I decided to bring together Hollywood and Capitol Hill. So I did a big summit. It was at the Library of Congress, or in one of their meeting rooms. And we had 8 congressional offices there. And I brought some folks like Mariska Hargitay, who plays Detective Olivia Benson on Law & Order SVU. I think she's been on for 17, 18 years in that role. 26? Okay. Oh my God, I'm losing track. And then also Neil Baer, who was at the time the executive producer of the show. He was there for, I think, 11 years. And before we went on stage to put on this summit, this event, so that, the congressional offices would kind of wake up to some social issues, Mariska took me aside, and somebody was with us and actually took a photo of that moment, because we were together talking and we burst into laughter. And I have a picture of us with the big mouths open, laughing at this moment when she said to me, Sandra, will you ask Neil, the executive producer, to do an episode on the rape kit backlog in this country?
Oh my God.
I said, Mariska, he loves you. Why don't you ask him? And she said, I know he does, but he listens to you, she said. And we both started to laugh.
Oh.
And that's the photo I have. But of course, Neil agreed, and he did an episode on SVU about the rape kit backlog. And what happened? We put out calls to action, but they were soft. They were things like, invite your local chief of police to your home for a viewing party with your friends. Watch the episode together and then have a discussion about the importance of this ending the rape kit backlog. And, we also partnered with 4 groups. See if I can remember now. Nick Kristof of the New York Times, the writer, and he tweeted to his fan base. We gave him a little 30-second tweet, a little video montage of the episode. Human Rights Watch, Huffington Post, and NBC.com. And they all posted our calls to action, a little, this little 30-second, montage about the upcoming episode. What happened? 35 news outlets picked up the story.
Wow.
We didn't reach out to the news outlets, but they saw this little 30-second montage. And all of a sudden, the rape kit backlog, which nobody knew about or had heard of, like, why should I care? What does it have to do with me? Why is that a problem? All of a sudden, it was in 35 news outlets. And the New York Times became so interested, they tracked the changes in policy and practice after the episode aired for 2 years. There was a whole series. And so the episode was a huge hit. It really was a big spike in the audience numbers.
Definitely.
And what happened? A $42 million bill was approved by Congress to end the rape kit backlog. And then a few years later, a $102 million bill was passed. So even more funding. And prior to all of that, Mariska had been lobbying Congress for years, but not able to get them to move until what? A story. A story that was compelling entertainment, that had no finger wagging. It just was a story that grabbed and held attention, took people into suspension of disbelief. They had huge knowledge gains, attitude changes, and changes in behavior. And there were changes in law all across the United States. I have slides somewhere where I have, headlines on all of these things. So this is the power of story. And
that is Thank you so much. And thank you for the details. And I knew you were part of that. And I also know Mariska even has a nonprofit about that, the rape kit backlog after. So thank you, Sandra. Again, that's what I believe my productions precisely at this moment are about that. It's because as a media psychology, I know the importance of how media impacts behavior. And again, doing it without finger wagging, it's so important. So thank you again. Sandra, you've changed the world, you impacted the world, and you keep doing it. And you lost your home in Pacific Palisades fires. But before that, your son died. And oh God, what tragedies. And I wanted to bring them now because people can hear you, how excited you are talking about what you do and what you've done in the war and what you keep doing it. But just a year ago, you had a tragedy. So can you share that with the audience?
I will. Thank you for asking, Rossi. I know we kind of follow each other, so you knew what
Yeah.
was going on. A year ago, I lost my son. He was in his 40s and he was very ill. He had been for some time. And so while it wasn't unexpected, it was a shock when it happened. And anybody out there who's gone through the loss of a child, my heart is with you because I can't think of anything harder. And one thing I've learned from this is that while it felt like the end of the world, it wasn't the end of the story. And that life does go on. And there's a lot in our society, we don't talk about grief. And in fact, thinking about my past work, I did a series on, well, here's what I called it: Die Well or Die Trying, Scripting a Better Exit. I did that at first at Writers Guild West in LA. And 3 days later, I got a call from New York from the Writers Guild East. And they said, "Hey, we heard you did this panel and our members keep talking about it. Will you come and do it in New York too?" So we recreated it. It wasn't exactly the same. I had different people involved. But there was great interest on the part of the creative community in how to depict death and dying more accurately and realistically and authentically. And as a kind of segue to how do we talk about grief? Our society doesn't talk about it. We don't have language for it. What do we normally do? And I've been looking at myself since my son died. I was very hurt initially to see that some people I considered friends were avoiding me because, and I realized it's not that they don't love me. They were afraid that they would say something wrong, do it wrong, hurt me in the process. And I started to think, did I do that to other people in the past? Because I didn't know any better. Maybe I did. I don't know. So I'm just dropping this in for the storytellers because we need a lot more about grief. And here's the thing about grief: it's simply a measure of the degree of our love. It is nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to hide, and it's nothing to just get over. No. Grief is something that lives inside of me, just as love does. I will always love my son, and I will always grieve the loss of him. So, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but
No,
this is
please. Thank
very
you for that.
alive for me right now. So, I had 10 months after my son died, having his memorial and all of the, the confusion of grief and, finding my way 10 months into it. Also, 2 months after my son died, I had a commitment in Brazil. I'd been asked to speak a year earlier at the largest creativity conference in Latin America. 50,000 people attended that year. And I'd been asked a year earlier to give a master class and to give a keynote speech. And so here we are. Now it's coming up and it's 2 months after my son's died. And I said to myself, how can I can't even tie my shoes. How am I going to actually, I kept trying to organize a talk. I couldn't. I couldn't organize a talk. So I said to myself, you're off the hook. You can cancel and stay home and cry. Or you can get on the flight, get some help packing, get on the flight, go to Rio, which is where my family lived when I was growing up, and cry in the hotel room, then go do something, hopefully of value to the audience. And when you're done, you can go back and cry some more. It makes me cry. So I thought, okay, I'm going to show up. I don't know what's going to happen. And whatever your spiritual beliefs, I'm a very committed meditator. I meditate every day, and I have a very, very strong relationship with a power greater than myself. And it's important to me. And I just said, look, you have never let me down, and you have to speak through me, because I can't organize anything. I couldn't find the through line of the talk. So this is, it's a little bit of a blur now, but I was able to show up, and I was able to just go and be. Not do, just be with the most amazing people. They were the most amazing people at this creativity gathering. And I recommend, it's called Rio 2, the number 2, C for creativity.
Oh.
Go. If you get a chance, go.
Rio
And if you want to speak, you have to reach out through Rossi to me, and I'll connect you. But it's an amazing conference. Well, anyway, you know what happened? Some force came through me with that master class, and they had very bright lights in my eyes because they were filming. I could only see the first 2 rows of the audience. The audience sobbed through the whole master class. Wow. I didn't tell a sad story. I didn't talk about my son's death, but somehow they picked up on something, and they saw through the whole thing. And when it was over, they came and hugged me and cried with me. It was the most incredible experience. And again, what does that tell me? We are not alone. If we allow and receive, that there's a huge community out there, especially in the creative community, because you're all very sensitive people like me. We're all very sensitive. And it was so healing for me. I felt my son with me the whole time. I felt spoken through. It was messy. It wasn't as organized as I normally am. But there was a reason I was there. So what Rossi alluded to with this year is that 10 months after my son died, my home burned to the ground in the Palisades fires. I wasn't home, so everything was gone. I was a keeper of our Brazilian maternal lineage, and I had all the art, all the letters, all the photographs, all of my son's gifts and photos, everything related to him. I had everything, and it all disappeared in an instant. That was 10 months after my son died, exactly 10 months later. And, it has been a free fall since then. Now it's 3 months later. I am here staying at a friend's house in her condo. I still haven't landed in my own place. Believe me, I've been looking, but it's been very elusive. It hasn't happened yet, so I'm still here. 1 month after that, so 11 months after my son died, my daughter, I have 2 children, one gone and one here. My daughter gave birth to her first child, my first grandchild, who is a boy, and who she named after my son, Chalo. So we have the next generation of Chalo after his uncle. So this is why I say it's not the end of the story. And the state of the world is very dark right now. It is not the end of the story. And what I would say is we have the power to root in something deeper than the changing world, because the world is always changing. There are ups, there are downs. It's always like this. And it has been for millennia.
Yeah.
And in the Indian Vedic tradition, they talk about these huge arcs. They call them ascending times and descending times. And we're just at the transition into an ascending time. But this is going to take thousands of years. So it won't happen in our lifetime, but the ascending age is guaranteed. This is the good news. What do we do in the meantime? Because this is a clash of light and dark right now. We root in something deeper. We root in our creativity. We root in our spirituality. We tell our stories. We make art. This is what we do. We don't stop. We do it more. We do it louder. We do it better. We do it with the confidence that we are here for a reason at this time. That makes me cry. I don't know why.
Yes, and
We are
continue.
here for a reason, and we're here to express our gifts. That's why we're here. Your gifts are so important right now. Your power of story is more important than ever. And I want to read this one quote to you. I'll pull it up. And it's from Harold Goddard, The Meaning of Shakespeare. The destiny of the world is determined less by the battles that are lost and won than by the stories it loves and believes in. That's why your stories are so important, because
Yes.
we need the world to fall in love with your stories and to believe them.
Yes.
That is what's going to take us to a new level of consciousness that's going to show us a new way of living on the earth, a new way of treating one another. And that's power. You've got this power. And
I think, thank you, Sandra. And before you give us, give the audience your last recommendations in this episode, hopefully, I really would like for you to be every month with us. Sandra, I do believe in people. We must be not even blind, but deaf if we don't see the changes happening in the world. But I love the explanation, and I knew you are a very spiritual person and your connection. And like you said, and I just want to say this. This podcast is called The Hollywood Makers, and before that is Dale Cuéntame, and you understand that in Spanish because we started this. And I move it because I started interviewing people, and then I say multiculturalism, because for me, the word is human. It doesn't have to be any class or race. And then I call it the Hollywood Makers because it doesn't matter, and that's the way I say it. And when we were with Claudia, who's our host too, Hollywood makers are everywhere. If you're making, because it's like you say, people believe that Hollywood is the center, the universe, but no. Everywhere in Honduras, my country, in different places, people are making art, are creating things. So that's why I call you are the Hollywood maker. You're listening to this, you are the Hollywood makers, whether you work on tech or entertainment. Now, you said something very important, and that's why I'm going to ask you in your recommendation. People who listen to this podcast are intergenerational, cross-generational, so different ages. But I love to leave legacies to the young people. As you know, we have children. It's not just about telling the stories and knowing the power of the stories, of our own stories, but it's how are we learning? And this is, again, spiritual in my side too. It's like, yes, there are many changes happening. Like you say, we might not see different things, the evolution, but at the end, I call it Papa Dios, that superior force. He just wants us to be happy and be good to ourselves and then to others. Because if we can do that, then we can, not envy, and that's what I call it. Look for the success, but be nice to yourself and to others. So I believe that's the message. Whether there's an earthquake, whether there's a politician doing disasters, whatever it is, be nice to yourself, and then you can be nice to others. But the recommendation here, you are the expert. Oh my God, all the things that you've lived, and you're still doing what you do. So what are your recommendations?
I would say, and thank you, Rossi, that is so important. being good to oneself is not always easy. So in order to live at this level that you're describing, this level of being able to love oneself and to be able to love others. So what do we do to get there or to maintain that? Because everybody has a good day or a bad day. So there are a few things for me, and I'm very committed to them, because to deliver excellence, whether it's to myself or to others, whether it's in my work or my personal life, I need to be in a good place. I'm responsible for that. What does it take? For me, it takes meditation every day. So even if you give it 5 minutes of stillness, of just going inside, letting the whole world fall away, and going inside and tapping that Papa Dios, as you call him, or spirit, or love, or peace, whatever that, it could be a quality, whatever that is. For me, it's having at least a moment to do that every day. It's exercise. I go out and walk. I walk 5 miles a day. I do all kinds of writing while I'm walking because I dictate. I use the time, but I'm out. And that moves the energy through. That really helps. Staying connected to other people and to community is really important. You all have your community networks, but it's like, making sure, did I call someone today? Did I have a conversation that meant something today? Do it every day. It's like a practice, it's a little self-care practice. These are just some, and I'm big on, I'm vegan. I eat really well. I cook. I do all the things, that's just part of my thing. But it's having whatever that combination of things might be for you that restores you, that puts you in your best self. And, when I notice that I'm starting to have, complicated thoughts or go into a down place, the other thing I try to remind myself is to stay curious. Even when I had this devastation of losing my child, who was an adult, but losing my son, and then losing my home and everything. And I, was in shock. One of the things that got me through was staying curious. Why is this happening? And not that I have to know why, but I have to stay open to finding some meaning and something that I can learn. And, I think our wisdom and what we bring to the world that's of value sometimes comes from great loss and great pain. Not always. It can come from great joy and playfulness as well. So, I think that when these really hard things do happen, and they always come and go, that's the nature of life. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's just the nature of life. That, for me, this is how I'm wired. I got to find some meaning in it. It's just like with the state of the world right now. We may never know why exactly this is happening at this moment. Things are in collapse. And yet the meaning, like for all of you storytellers, is you're here with a power. So as this collapse happens, and as we see this darkness surfacing, it makes what you do even more important. There's meaning in it. And there's meaning in your role in this world. And so for me, it's finding that. But the bottom line is keep it simple and find those things that give you joy. I love to dance. Of course, I love to dance. So, even if it's once a week, I give that to myself. I hope you do.
Keep it simple. That's so wonderful. Ending this interview, which I would like to make it double the time. But thank you, Sandra. Thank you for sharing your light. and for doing the work you do. I know now you're working with Harvard. You've been working with USC, with UCLA, now with Harvard, and you work with Hollywood, Bollywood, and everywhere with storytellers, with Hollywood makers. Thank you for that, and thank you for all your resilience and inspiration that you give. And again, hopefully you can be with us again. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rossi, and thank you for what you're doing. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to talk to you again. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for being here with us for this conversation with Sandra. As you can see, her work in social impact storytelling and her deep personal resilience remind us of the power of media and entertainment projects like yours and how they can help communities heal and find light even in the darkest moments. I invite you to subscribe to the Hollywood Makers podcast and share it. My name is Rosie Gigure. Until next time.